Hey everyone, and welcome to Identity Crisis, the mad rise of online account opening fraud. My name is Uri, and I'm Chief Cyber Officer and co-founder at BioCatch. We are at an identity crisis point. If you were asking credit card companies and banks a few years ago about account opening fraud, they would say, yeah, it's a kind of a minor inconvenience. That's not their reaction nowadays. It's getting to be a tidal wave. This is from Gartner a few years ago. You can see things like account takeover fraud, payment fraud. These are the main areas of concern for risk and security management. But there's one thing that tops all of these concerns, and that's new account, synthetic or stolen identity fraud. So it is becoming the number one concern regarding fraud in financial institutions. Another interesting trend is to see what sort of information financial criminals are stealing these days. It used to be credit card information. That was the top priority for financial cyber criminals. But now the number one data element is social security number, which is an identity element. And in fact, identity is becoming a commodity. It's traded in the dark web, and every American citizen's records have already been stolen several times over. If we can look at this list, for example, it shows all sorts of data breaches. Many of those are related to identity. Specifically, if we talk about the big credit reference agencies, the big credit bureaus, data aggregators that have been hacked over the years. And this fuels this economy of account opening fraud. Now, the industry is fighting back, realizing that, good old KYC, know your customer, is basically dead. And long live next generation data. So it used to be about what you know and matching all of the information about the user, looking at the data that the user provides and seeing that it all stacks and it's what the records show. But now we have additional data to look at. For example, what you have, which is the user resources, what you do, which is your digital footprint, and what you are, user behavior, that's behavioral biometrics. So a couple of examples for each of those categories. Again, historically, this would be KYC data, residence, license information, credit history information. Those type of data points are already in the wrong hands, and when someone, a cyber criminal, is doing account opening fraud, they have access to all of this. So therefore, a lot of financial institutions and other related industries have started to untap additional lines of defense, starting with device. This has been something that the industry started to adopt about 10 years ago, 15 years ago. What sort of device are you coming from? What's the reputation of that device? Information about your location, information about your phone and phone line. More recently, what are you doing? So what's your digital footprint? Any kind of social media reputation that you have, email reputation, open source analysis on your identity. And more recently, behavioral biometrics. These are different types of analysis. For example, if you're opening an account, you should be familiar with the data that you're providing. It's your own personal information. You should not be familiar with the process of account opening because, hey, you just open an account. A criminal is going to be the opposite. They're going to be very familiar with the process, but not familiar with the data. And that's the sort of analysis that behavioral biometrics is now providing. So, behavioral biometrics, you kind of heard about behavioral biometrics before, but more in the context of profiling. So the idea of behavioral biometrics, when it actually started, was to create a profile of a regular user behavior and then watch for anomalies. This is a classic example. You see someone that logs in and then interacts with their online banking application. What you see on the screen is the person's mouse motion. These are several sessions, several pages, but the mouse motion is basically the same. So that's how you create a profile of the regular user behavior. You can use keyboard analysis, you can analyze mouse motion. If the user is operating on a mobile device, you're going to look at accelerometer, gyro, and touch data. The idea is to create a baseline and then watch for anomalies. Like in this specific case, this account was compromised. The user provided the credentials to a criminal, and now the criminal is accessing the account. You're going to see a very different type of behavior. So now it's not the same mouse motion. There's a strange bump in the center of the motion. And essentially, this is a way for the financial institution, for example, to say, hey, we do see an anomaly based on the profile, based on the baseline that was created. Another use of behavioral biometrics is to look for threats. For example, remote access. This is a mobile device. User is interacting on a mobile device. You can see the swipe motions. These are not going to be straight lines. Even if you think that you move straight in a straight line on your mobile device, you actually have a small arc. Then you see the taps. Now the taps are surrounded, the dot is surrounded by a blue circle. That's your finger pressing on the actual touch screen. That's a normal situation for this account. And now this account was compromised with a Helpdesk scam. Hey, we're the Helpdesk, there's something wrong with your account, your bank account, your mobile device, something like that. We're here to help you. You just have to install something allowing us remote assistance. People fall for that and then install some sort of remote assistant tool, or maybe like a rogue application, and then the attacker has remote access on their device. This does not look the same. Typically, the attacker is going to control that device using a mouse and keyboard, and essentially you're going to see these long lines. That's mouse motion, not someone actually physically scrolling up and down on the device. And all of the dots, you don't see the blue circle around them because no one's actually touching the screen. It's all mouse clicks. Beyond that, because of the remote access, there's going to be some latency. The latency creates some disruptions to hand-eye coordination. And if you have the right system, you can actually spot that and say, okay, we now know that this mobile device is being remotely controlled, right? Now, if we talk about account opening though, what's the use of behavioral biometrics? You cannot really profile anyone. They're just establishing the account, right? But if you actually look at the way criminals behave, you can now analyze second by second what they're doing. We're going to start with a very interesting case from one of the top 5 credit card issuers in the US. They basically give you a credit card online within 30 seconds. You go to the website, you select a credit card, you click apply now, and then you start filling this online form, providing your name, email address, date of birth, mobile phone number, address, social security number, and other data points. Essentially, that's what regular users will go through, but also what criminals will go through. So let's actually look at a specific application. The session timeline here, every vertical bar is an interaction, like the user typed something or interacted with the form. It took 1 minute and 34 seconds to complete that. And the interesting thing is that the first name was pasted 3 seconds into the session. That's actually pretty incriminating. Why are you pasting your first name? You're supposed to be familiar with it. And the other thing is, how come it's so fast? There's actually a video that will show us how fast it was. So 3 seconds into the session, already we see Control V. It's not autofill, by the way. Someone actually was ready before the application started, form started, went to the application flow, and then used Control V to paste something. That's criminal behavior. Another thing that was pasted was the social security number, date of birth was also pasted. All of these suggest that whoever is doing this are not really familiar with the personal information, but they're also quite familiar with the process, right? 3 seconds and they're beginning to interact. If we look at deposit fraud, that's another interesting trend. So we talked about credit card account opening. Of course, a criminal will be interested in that to just get a credit card or a loan or some sort of instant credit. But also deposit fraud is another lucrative type of business, because what you do there is you open a new account and then you move money from a compromised account that you have. So let's say that you have money, an account that you have compromised in bank A. You open an account in bank B and say, hey, I'm the user, I want to open an account, I want to deposit something from bank A. Typically, bank B will send some small transaction to bank A to prove, that once you provide that specific amount, to prove that you own that account, you access that account, and you can provide that information. And of course, they're going to do all of the regular KYC checks. But of course, if you own that account, if you actually not own but control that account, you can provide all of that KYC information, because you have access to the identity information, and you also control the account in bank A. You can just open an account in bank B and move all of the money from account A to account B. Thing is that bank B is now responsible for the fraud loss. That's called deposit fraud, and let's actually see someone opening an account. They're pasting a lot of information. In this case, they're pasting the routing code, the account number, user ID, password. When they do the actual payment, and then the interesting thing here is, all of this is happening quite fast. And what you can see is they completed the funding. Now they completed opening the account. And look at the analysis showing genuine users versus criminals. About 2% of on an account opening sessions will have this behavior where we see a paste from a different application. So essentially an alt tab to a different tab, and then paste the information from that tab. That's 2% of the users. For criminals, it's 25%. This is pretty, significant, so it's quite informative seeing that. At the same time, we also understand that we cannot really incriminate 2% of the population, or, we need more information, because 25% is not going to be a good detection rate if you want to detect those sort of fraud cases. So in any case, that's like, one type of analysis. Obviously, you need much more than that, but deposit fraud is another type of account opening fraud that is skyrocketing these days. So we talked about, pasting information. We talked about, typing information. Now let's look at the difference between good users and bad users. Criminals are going to type off a list. So if they choose not to, populate the field automatically with some sort of bot, or to use pasting, which you've seen that it's only in 25% of the cases, they will typically type off a list. They have a list of victims. Thing is that short-term memory is limited to just 7 characters or items. So think about someone typing a social security number that does not belong to them. It will be very mechanical, right? So we see someone typing, the social security number. It takes them quite, like 9 seconds to complete the SSN. Typically, it's going to be something like 4 seconds for an SSN. Date of birth, it's like 2 digits. I'm looking at the list. I'm going back. Okay, another 2 digits. Okay, I know the year. It's going to be 19 something. Okay, what's the number? Again, going to the list, going back. This is a very mechanical process. Typing off a list is something that you can also understand criminals do. They want to be efficient. They have a list, but essentially that's the way for them to, show the fact that they are not familiar with that information. It's not top of their mind. As opposed to something that we're going to see right now, sometimes the know your customer checks actually conflict with the next generation analysis. There was a specific case with one of the big card companies that essentially said, hey, we're going to decline an application because it's definitely fraud. 96% chance of something being fraud. But when we looked at the data, it was interesting. The session timeline, again, is all of the activities that the user is doing. And what you can see is that the social security number is typed continuously. And by the way, behavior biometric is not interested in the data itself. You're going to see it's all 111s. When we actually look at it again, the typing is quite confident. You don't see the same thing like typing off a list. Certainly you don't see any pasting. It's not autofill. whoever is typing this information is quite familiar with the social security number, suggesting it's their own social security number. Long-term memory is a very strong inheritance field. The other interesting thing here, look at the timeline. There's a 58-second pause. Why? Because in this specific case, it's a hotel credit card. So in order to open the account, you need to provide your hotel loyalty number. You probably have some hotel loyalty numbers, but no one remembers them. And it takes you a minute or two to fetch them, maybe from your inbox or something like that. Maybe it's in your wallet. So about 1 minute is the norm. And we do see that this user also, paused for about 1 minute to fetch that number and then continued with the application. This is a very, very positive sign, right? This person behaves like everyone else. Criminals are not going to bother with waiting for 1 minute because they need this information. They have this information. It's all ready for them. It's going to be right along, the name, date of birth, and social security number because they need it to open the account. Whereas, real users, there's going to be some type of information that you're going to be very familiar with. It's etched in your long-term memory. But other types of information you have to research, you have to fetch. And that's essentially analyzing the way a genuine user will behave. So what do we have here? We have here a kind of a conflict because the analysis suggests, the next generation analysis suggests that it's a good user, right? Familiar with the social security number, behaves like everyone else. But the card company said, hey, that's bad. We were actually curious about that. We asked the credit card company, hey, guys, what do why you think this is going to be a fraudulent application? They said, well, we like you very much, guys, but it has to be fraud because the guy is dead. He's been dead for 10 years. We checked the social security number. It belongs to a dead person. Well, that was bad. We were so sure that this is, an actual genuine person. And, we asked the issuer, can you actually call the user, to try to find out what went on here? Because, it looks so real, like it's a real, genuine person. They said, they're dead. We're not going to call them. We had a bit of an argument, and eventually they caved in and said, okay, we're going to call them. Let's see what happens. So the fraud operations team now calls the user. It was a miracle. He picked up the phone. He was not dead. Ended up that he had a typo in the social security number. He just had a mistake. Let's see it again. Typed very confidently, but with a typo that the user did not realize. This actually matched to a totally different person. The name was wrong. The social security was belonging to someone that died. So sometimes the data is going to suggest that this is a bad application, but some of the next generation analysis don't really care about the data. It cares about the way you behave. It cares about your device, your other elements, and therefore sometimes it's more trustworthy than actually looking at the data itself. Let's move to synthetic identity. And synthetic identity is a very interesting new problem in the US, relatively new. It has been around for over a decade, but it's becoming more and more of a problem. This is from ID Analytics, and what you can see is, social security belonging to, one identity, a name is invented or, belonging to a different identity, date of birth, etc., etc. It's like combining a kind of sort of a digital identity that does not really belong to any specific person because it's a mashup of various identities. Now, then what do they do with this identity? Because that identity obviously cannot open a credit card, right? They don't have any kind of credit history. No one's going to give them a loan. So the idea is to create a synthetic identity, and then through some collusion with rogue lenders, begin to apply for loans and then build credit history by returning the loan. So it's reported as a positive thing. Another trick is to attach this identity to someone who has a perfect FICO score, like a credit card account holder as a secondary user in that account. That's another thing that you can do to essentially get the tenure of a good user. So whether you focus on building a credit history or just a very good tenure, the idea is to create this identity and then create a credit history and good credit for that person who does not exist, of course, and then launching your attack. You just go to a credit card company, you open a credit card account, you maybe apply for a loan, a mortgage even, etc. One in four synthetic identities are actually using child's social security numbers, and the trafficking in child social security number in the dark web has increased dramatically. A lot of these are coming from healthcare breaches. So that's a very interesting trend, and of course not something that we want to see in the industry. The reaction of the industry was to start suspecting lots of people. So let's actually see one example. We see someone who is 31 years old, no driver's license, very thin credit history, and the Social Security was issued recently, just a few years ago. Obviously highly suspicious. They were asked to provide government records, tax records, and then they never submitted the records. So the transaction was canceled, the application was canceled. Let's see the way they applied. This is from an iPhone. So they're applying via an iPhone. They're providing right now their email. They're providing date of birth. They had a typo in the date of birth, so they corrected it and just continued. But it's all natural and very confident. This is the phone number. Little pause before annual income. They kind of thought about it, and then they provided the annual income, and then went to type the Social Security. And again, you can see it's all very natural, no pauses. This is not someone typing off a list, not someone pasting information. They're familiar with all of the personal data fields. Another interesting thing is they also looked at the rates and fees for 90 seconds before even starting the application. Now, if you kind of look at all of these together, this is not going to be a synthetic identity. This may be a suspect, but it looks like a genuine person. And when the credit issuer, that had this level of analysis investigated further, what they found was it's an immigrant. It kind of explains everything. The SSN and the thin file. This is someone who works for a big tech firm in San Francisco area. They're actually a great candidate, a great acquisition target. So, blaming them and pointing the finger and saying, hey, you're probably some sort of synthetic identity, you have to prove yourself. That was something that almost killed that specific application. And of course, that's not what banks and issuers would like to do. Let's see the opposite. Now let's see someone who is too familiar with the process. Before we saw someone that was not familiar, went to see the terms and conditions and stuff like that, but this is someone who is too familiar. Income source, right? When you click on the income source, when you open an account, there's this window that says, okay, employed, retired, self-employed, unemployed, military, etc. It takes you maybe like 4 seconds, 5 seconds to read through and say, okay, well, I'm employed, so let's click employed. And then if we look at a specific cyber gang that was attacking one of the banks, it was less than a second. I mean, they knew what's going to happen. They have been there before. They are opening, lots of accounts. So they're not stuck on this screen. They know what to select. It takes them less than a second to select something and then proceed. This is someone too familiar with the process. So if you think about all of the criminals, I mean, they have the data. They're attacking the same target, again and again, because they know the specific controls in that specific target. They know they're not going to be caught. So therefore, they're going to be very familiar with the process. They're not going to be familiar with the data. And that's essentially what we see here. Another interesting trend is looking at the age of the user reflected in their behavior. And this is another fascinating example. This specific user applying for a credit card was born in 1918. You kind of remember the year, right? Because World War I ended, and also the Spanish flu, that was also 1918. Let's see someone who is over 100 years old applying for a credit card. So extremely rapid mouse motion, extensive use of tab and mouse wheel. This is not typical for someone who is over 100 years old. And of course, it's all around statistics and probabilities, but it's highly unlikely that this person is such an elderly, citizen. The bottom line is that when you look at criminals, and a lot of the behavior that they will display is not going to be in line with genuine users, with the claimed age of the user or the known age of the user, etc. Another interesting thing is the fact that sometimes, even without seeing any of the data, you do know that something is wrong. And this is called the curious case of the straw company. Let me explain. This is a straw company. The name of the company we kind of changed. It's not the last straw, but it's a company based in San Diego. It provides quality paper straws. As you know, in California, it's the law. You have to provide your customers with paper straws. So people can buy those packs. If you're a restaurant, you buy a crate, full of straws. There was a sizable order of 62 crates, 740,000 straws, costing $15,000, plus $10,000 for urgent shipping to Tuvalu. What's Tuvalu? Welcome to Tuvalu. It's an island in the Pacific Ocean. 11,000 people. They don't need that many straws. So this is all curious. However, in this specific case, even without knowing any of this data, not the fact that it's a straw company, selling straws, not the fact that it's a very big order, the number of straws, the payment for the straws, the $10,000 for the urgent shipping, the location in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Without seeing any of this data, you could know that this is fraud simply based on the way the information was provided. And again, let's see a quick video. This is someone pasting the credit card number and the CVV2, typing the expiration and pasting the postal code. Think about your postal code. Did you ever paste your postal code? It's easier to type your postal code, your zip code, than to type it. Easier to type it than to paste it. People don't paste the zip code. In fact, when you look at the statistics, it's about 99.9% of the users, they never paste the zip code. This is, by the way, one small fact, but there are, dozens of features, around each of those fields. Another interesting thing about zip code is how fast you begin typing your zip code. Because you're familiar with it, you have some muscle memory that immediately starts going into action and almost like automatically typing your zip code if you go through some sort of online form. Bottom line is, this person is not familiar with their own zip code. Now, this was a curious case because you can say, okay, fine, we shouldn't trust this transaction. It looks very, very suspicious. But why would a fraudster go through all of the trouble of buying 62 crates, okay, all of these straws, and ship them urgently to Tuvalu? What's the point? What are they trying to achieve? Are they trying to, take the goods and then sell them in Tuvalu? What for? You might think of all sorts of creative ideas. Maybe they need the straws to buy some, to build some huts, or Tuvalu is actually having water level issues. The surface water level is rising all the time. Maybe they need the straws for emergency or something. No, it wasn't something like that. The interesting thing about this specific fraud was the amount for the shipping. $10,000. The entire thing was built to inflate the amount. It's an urgent shipping to the middle of the Pacific Ocean, 62 crates. It will have to cost a fortune. So what actually happened here was the following. After making the payment go through, right? So, using a corporate credit card, one of the US banks, the user called the merchant and said, hey, I have made a terrible mistake. I didn't realize it's so expensive. $10,000. Your shipping company is crazy. They charge $10,000 for this. I have another shipping company that I prefer using, and they only charge $2,000. Can you do me a favor? Because I already paid you $10,000. Can you move $10,000 to that shipping company, and then they'll use it for this shipping and then additional shipping that I'll have in the future? Like crediting me. And the merchant says, "Are you sure? I mean, there's lots of crates here." Yeah, they're fantastic. We work with them all the time. They're very cheap. You should, use them for all of your shipping. And of course, it wasn't a real, shipping company. It was an account created or opened by the criminal. The bottom line is, when you think about account opening, even e-commerce fraud, any kind of case and scenario where you have a new user, you don't have any kind of profile on the user, prior behavior to look at, transaction monitoring to look at, and things like that. You know that KYC is dead, but you do have more and more capabilities: device reputation, location analysis, this sort of analysis called behavior biometrics, to tell you, hey, something is either very good about this or something is terribly wrong about this. Another interesting thing to note is that the AO fraud is really changing the ecosystem. This is from California. There was a new digital bank that was opened, and when you actually look at the number of new users on a daily basis, it's around 100 people on a daily basis. And all of a sudden, it jumped to about 700 people. So this is crazy. I mean, they said, hey, finally the marketing team is doing something. No, they're not. It's an attack. You have 100 good users and 600 bad users every day, okay? And essentially, the bank did have device reputation and email reputation, meaning, what do we know about this email? How does it relate to the device and the phone and other elements? This was allowing them to stop about 50% of the attack, but there were still 300 people, okay, that were registering every day, as opposed to something like 100 good users. This is not sustainable. The bank will have to either, stop receiving new customers or allow them in, but then don't allow them to make, any kind of money transfers or move money out until they sort out, who's a good user and who's a bad user. And that's difficult because the criminals will know everything about the good users. Initially, when I looked at that, I thought that it may be like a bot that is opening all of these accounts. No, it wasn't. It was a human being. And in fact, it was a specific person that was opening all of these hundreds of accounts. They were doing it very mechanically. They were very familiar with the onboarding process. They were totally unfamiliar with the data. Okay, short-term memory, typing mechanically, working off a list, not pasting any information. They were just typing all day long. So that's essentially one of the risks that banks and fintech companies are facing these days. Whenever you launch a new digital product and you just open it to the entire world to register, if you don't have the right capabilities to detect those sort of attacks, you can go down. You can really suffer from a massive campaign like this. Not a bot campaign, not a DDoS attack, nothing like that. Just opening a lot of fake accounts that belong to real people. Not synthetic identities even. It's just identity theft because the data is there. And then it's going to be very, very problematic to handle this situation. So new digital banks, good luck with that. Make sure that you have these sort of defenses in place. Another impact of account opening fraud on the economy is a new service in the US called Zelle. And I'm sure most of you know Zelle. It's a great service. It allows you to pay from your account. I think that in the UK you'll have similar types of money movement capabilities. You basically can send money to anyone in your contact list. You can send money to an email account, things like that. This is in the US, and because of the ease of account opening and the ease of compromising email accounts, the whole Zelle industry is is essentially shaking, because this is, a single story, but it kind of reflects the underlying problem of the whole system. So in this case, fraudsters randomly compromise the business owner's email account, right? So just a regular, Gmail, Yahoo, whatever sort of a account belonging to a person. They saw that this person was interacting with the renters of their property, and saying, "Hey, if you want to move money, why don't you use Zelle? You can send me the rent money using Zelle." So what the criminal did was open a fake account, okay, using the same information at a top 5 bank, and then enrolling for Zelle at that bank using the compromised email. Now the thing is that once you use the email of the user, that new bank account is now attached to that email, right? The bank will obviously send something to the email, like a one-time code that you have to repeat, so it basically proves that you control that email. But if that email is compromised, okay, this check doesn't mean anything. So essentially, beating the KYC checks and then beating the email check of a new registration, attaching that new bank account to that email. And the bank said, okay, but this email address is already linked to another account at another bank. Do you want to change it to our bank? And the fraudster says, yeah. And the bank simply enrolled the fraudster in Zelle, because now this email account, basically is attached to this new account. And basically at that point, it's a game over, because any money movement that will go to this email account will automatically go to the fraudster's new account at this top 5 bank. All right, so the renters send the money to the Zelle email address as normal, but now going to a newly open account controlled by the criminal rather than the real user. Game over. So essentially, the fact that account opening so far was not top priority for banks, credit card companies, etc. It's changing the industry, right? You have all of these cases. It doesn't have to be fraud. It can also be money laundering. It can be mule accounts. Let's actually talk about mules, because there is an implication of a high account opening fraud world. This is like a diagram, a very crude one, showing a typical fraud supply chain. Obviously, it's not a single person that can do everything. As a fraudster, you typically choose between, am I going to harvest information, break into accounts and break into databases, or do phishing, trojans, etc., collect the information, or am I going to use that stolen information to cash out? Typically people make that choice. The harvesting process would use tools and hosting and delivery mechanisms to infect more people or send them phishing emails and stuff like that, or just break into a database. The cash out fraudsters will be the ones that are tasked with emptying all of these accounts. They understand everything about the specific bank defenses, the credit card defenses. They know how to move money. They know what sort of controls are in place. And they also need to send the money, obviously not to themselves, but to some sort of collaboration account. And for many years, those were mule accounts, because it was very difficult to open an account. Let's say locally, if you're a criminal outside of the UK, to use an account in the UK. If you're outside of the US, to use an account in the US. So you always recruited local collaborators, some of them knowingly, some of them unknowingly. In Australia, for example, there was a case where the criminals went to high schools and said, "Hey, you have like a teenager account. We are kind of a charity company, charity, big charity, and donors, people that have lots of money will send money to your account. You're gonna pass it to us. We're the charity in East Europe, and you're gonna get a commission." So the teenagers didn't really realize they're actually collaborating with this sort of scheme. So sometimes the mules know that they're mules, sometimes they don't know that they're mules, they're being recruited. Um, Mules have been a very important part of that ecosystem. But now you don't need them. You can be your own mule. You can just open an account online. It's so easy these days, and just send money, from your compromised account to your newly established account, saving the need to work with mules. It's saving you a lot of money. Opening an account is free. You don't have to pay anyone. And once the money is in your new account, you can just do whatever you want with it. You can send it anywhere. You can buy things, whatever. So this is changing a lot of the economics of online fraud. All right, so let's actually summarize. What have we learned today? Identity is totally broken. Criminals behave differently. And when in doubt, call the dead guy. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and let's see if you have any questions.